Okay, great. So I'm really excited to start today because I have somebody that I've been admiring. Oh my God, got on YouTube 7 years, I think, ago, or 10 years ago, and Patrick Fanaji in 78 Cards talked about
Yeah.
you. And then I became a fan. And over the course, your content has been so stable and solid. It's been pretty much one of the 2 or 3 YouTubers I've been following. So I'm so excited. Racine, Owl Moon. I always say Owl Moon or Owl Moon Woman. I think they're obviously
I like that.
obviously one and the same. Thank you so much for saying yes.
Thank you for having me.
Excited. I don't do introduction because I feel that the people I interview are out to be known. And if somebody watching and they don't know you, it's a great opportunity for them to get to know you. So I'll put all your information below. But I know that a lot of people watching know you very well. So to dive in, I wanted
Mm,
to start off with the goddess theme because it is, you know this already. To me, you look like Isis. I think to a lot of people, you look archetypically representation of Isis. I know it's not the
mm.
same saying you are Isis, obviously, and I know you're good at not personalizing yourself too. But talking about the Isis, and especially as you yourself have matured into your womanhood as a
Mm,
woman, have you noticed changes in your personal relationship with her?
absolutely. And I think in a lot of ways, when you walk with a deity long term, it's like they're witnessing you and they wait for you to catch up with them. So, in a lot of ways, I feel like over the years, she's been waiting for me to be ready to explore a theme or an aspect of myself, and then to help me understand how I can hold space for that within the community once I've walked that. But oftentimes I have to walk it first in order to be able to understand maybe the frequency of it, Natalia. Maybe frequency is the word. So I think it's absolutely grown and shifted. And I always feel like she's very much witnessing. And when I'm there, she's ready to share the wisdom with me.
You're also a mom,
Yes.
right? So, and I see Isis also having the maternal, motherly nature to her. Have you noticed a shift in your relationship with her when you had your son?
Yes. And I would say there was a deepening of compassion for myself that I was able to explore with her. Because I think one of the key things that happens when you step into a role of motherhood, whether that's of a person or something else that you're creating in your life, it's understanding that there's something outside of you too, right? And so there's a loss of control sometimes that you have around that. You have to be open to that you're not going to be able to control every aspect of it. And so I think she's really helped me to have compassion towards myself, um, and to understand not everything is personal through the experience of motherhood. Like exchanges or the way in which my son and I might interact together has helped me to see that not everything that happens is something personal against or towards me, but that we're all having our own experiences. And I think she's really helped me to be able to honor that with my son because he's his own person. And to step into that, you realize like, okay, well, I carried him, but he's not mine. He's his own person. If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense,
Oh, it
Natalia.
makes perfect sense
Yeah.
because I'm not a mother, and I would say that birthing a child is different than birthing a project or a book. It's still a
Yeah.
birth, but I think it's a different caring
Yeah.
relationship to it, right?
Yeah.
But I totally get it because I see a lot of parents who cannot separate themselves from their kids and they project their ideals and what they want their kids to be versus
Yeah.
allowing it to be their own individual selves. And I think that's a challenge. It's very hard to do. So it
Yes.
sounds like Isis is helping you with the challenge.
Yes. And I would add to that, I think she's also helped me to understand why my parents and their parents may have made the choices they did
Mm,
from a space of in that parental role. When you feel out of control or feel like you don't have control, you can act from a place of fear. So Isis has helped me to really release, like, maybe if I've really been holding something about a way my father may have treated me or my mother treated me, to see that, to have more compassion for the choices that they made, which then sets me free from, that story.
Mm, I
Yeah.
love it. Bell Hooks' book. Do you know Bell Hooks? Bell Hooks' book on
Yeah.
something about love talks about that, realizing that our parents loved us the best way they knew how to love and to detach
Yes.
from the experiences we had with them. So
Yes.
Isis has been with you for how long now?
Well, I think she's walked with me since I was born. But I really consciously started to work with her in my very early 20s.
Okay. So I don't know if you share your age
Oh, I'm
openly.
39. I'm 39.
Okay, so
Yep.
she has been with you for almost two decades, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
Long time, and probably longer than that before your awareness came into
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
Do you find over the course of these 2 decades that you grown more intimately closer to her? Do you find yourself a little bit pulling away, thinking, I
Mm.
got the message and teachings you've given me, and it's time for me to maybe move on to another goddess?
Um, no, I've always felt her there. She's this, and in saying that, I will say she's often this like supportive presence back here,
Hmm.
and she knows when to step back. But I always feel her back here. And any point in time I need her, I just reach and I can feel her. And so in that way, she's always there, but she also shares very well. Like she knows when I'm working with someone else, and she's like, I'm here. And if you need me, I'm here, but you need to be with, like, for instance, this last spring, it was Venus. She like, that was a time for Venus and she knew, and she really stepped back, but I could always feel her back there.
Hmm.
So I think I feel closer to her than ever.
So this brings up a, a thought of loyalty to the deities or entities, whatever we worship. And it sounds like for you, she's this overreaching umbrella that is always
Mhm.
there, and the main umbrella. And underneath that umbrella, there might be other people you interact with, but she's the one
Yeah.
that is always
Yeah.
there. To that extent, how much do you think that particular, and I don't know if loyalty is the right word because it sounds negative,
Mm.
it sounds like you out to be loyal, but how much of that devotion, that's a better word, how much of that devotion do you think is important, and to what extent when one is working with a goddess?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I think I would consider the devotion aspect relationship. So I think I would say the devotion piece on my end is that even if I'm not solely working with her, I'm still connecting with her. And so that's still devoting myself in her, within her lineage. And that keeps our relationship thriving. So I look at so much of relationship with deity as about communication, you know? And so to me, it's about keeping that line of communication open. I don't, it's been interesting the last few months with the channel content of people really feeling like we need to make deity these major offerings, or like they won't talk to us. And that's not how I experience
Not
deity.
me.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
like,
no, not you.
I'm so, no, what I mean is like in my practice, I'm just like, forget it. First of all, it's too much for me. It's just too,
Yeah,
and I'm like, you're in my thoughts. I think that's enough. I think about you
exactly.
well. I carry you through, right? Yeah. So
Yes,
you feel like people
exactly.
have this need that they need to do something very drastic, dramatic, even
Yes,
orchestrated,
yes.
performance-like.
Yes. Yes. And I don't see the connection with deity like that. But I do think how I express my devotion is that I will have a conversation with Isis all the time, even if I'm not solely walking with her. And so I would say that's the devotional piece where I feel like I am honoring our relationship and our story together by showing up in that way.
Mm.
And because so how I work before I do any reading, I connect in with Isis. I don't do a reading without being connected to her. She's kind of like she holds the ground, the space sacred, and she holds the space so that I don't have things coming in that are going to distract me, right? So even when I'm not consciously walking through a season with her, I'm still talking to her every day. So in that way, I think that's the devotional work, and that's how she's, I guess, ride or die and long term for me. Does that make sense, Natalia? Or
It
yeah,
makes you
okay.
made it very, very clear. Do you think that in today's because this is not really tarot, but I'd say, suppose the spiritual community we're having on YouTube, oracles, tarot, goddesses, what's up. Do you feel that we're potentially over glamorizing, over exaggerating, overly putting this energies on a pedestal way too high?
Oh, that's such a good question. Oh, I haven't really thought about that, Natalia. I think, yes, I think we can have a tendency to do that. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, you can't prove in some undeniable way if that deity is even something that you're actually connecting with. And so to me, it's more, if this is an expression, if this is me connecting to an expression of myself, that's fine. I'm okay with that. Like, I'm okay if she's a separate entity. I'm okay if it's just me interacting with an expression of myself. I think when we put things on a pedestal, in some ways we can try to, I don't know, maybe deny responsibility.
Yeah.
And so to me, the deity work is like in the trenches, and I'm still in charge of my actions. And so I don't look at approaching her or any other deity as like, I have to be in an act of servitude to this being, or that I need to placate this being in order to get what I want, because I don't consider that deity as ever going to be giving me what I want. That's not the purpose, right? So I kind of look at them more as witnessing. But I do think we have this tendency to want to put things on a pedestal. I think that comes back to just Christian indoctrination in general.
Yeah, that makes me also, you said responsibility. And the reason why I brought up pedestal, because I think anytime we put anybody on a pedestal, a teacher or whatever, and worship that individual or entity or energy or goddess, we immediately cut ourselves off from potentially receiving those lessons, because I feel that this energy showing up, at least in my life, when they're showing up exactly when I need to learn something about myself. But I can't learn it if I create this distance, because if I worship somebody who just showed up, then I immediately start getting in the ego trips that I'm already her. Like, I resemble her so much. This is why she showed up. I'm already her. So I already possess all those qualities, instead of taking responsibility and integrating them and working on them through that energy.
Oh, absolutely. I love that. And I think that's very much, I think we're both approaching it on a slightly different perspective here, but I think we're pretty much saying the same thing. That the connection with deity, the work, it's about our personal growth. It's not about worshiping, or like you said, feeling like, oh, this means that I'm omnipotent then, and I don't have anything I need to work on. I'm all set. I'm good. It's everybody else's issue around me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like saying that Isis showed up in my life right now because I am already Isis, and wow, right. I'm in this place of empowerment, and I mean, talk about ego trip. Do you also feel that they, when I say they, I mean any energies, goddess-like energies or whatnot, show up in our lives precisely either because they're here to teach us something about ourselves, or because they need to work with us long term?
Yes, I would say yes to both, Natalia. I feel like Isis, just use this as an example because we're talking about this. Like, Isis is here for the duration of this incarnation for me in human form, and she's really here to hold a space long term. But I think, let's say, like another face of deity like Kali Ma will come in for a very specific reason, and I always know, because I'm working through something visceral, here's Kali. Like, she's boom, she's right there, and I have to work on this piece. And I would say that's across the board with every deity that I connect with, because I've worked across pantheons and with multiple deity in my experience. And I find with long-term clients, we'll have a deity come in for a very specific reason for what they're exploring and what they need to learn. So I absolutely think our long-term deities are there for the journey. And then we do this beautiful dance with other forms of consciousness that come in to teach us specific lessons. And it's not always a red lip and a nice high heel. Like, sometimes it's dirty, right? And sometimes we have to get dirty.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is personal. I don't know if you're going to want to answer this. You don't have to. because it wasn't on a list of questions. Do you remember when Isis 20 years ago came to you? What was it primarily she came to teach at that point?
Yeah, so she really came through to help me to see that I could no longer collude in my parents' religious storyline. So she really came through to say, it's not enough to not believe this in your heart. You have to live this. And that means that you're going to lose your family. And so you have to actually really believe in yourself and in this enough to say goodbye to a way of life and actually embody this. And that's why I think she is long term for me, because very much a lot of my story has been, even when there's no one else around, are you going to live this? Are you going to do this? Are you going to work in alignment with this? And I think that's why she's been the deity, because she is a mother goddess, and she also holds to that sovereignty, and she has a strength to her, but there's a love that's tempered with.
Do you ever
Yeah.
get fed up with her?
Oh,
Like you're getting a message and you're like, no, fuck off, Isis, not tonight.
oh yes, oh yes. Sometimes I do. Yes, and I always say with love, but fuck off. Or I'll say to her, or it's more Natalia. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do that thing. I know this isn't going to go well, but I'm going to do it anyhow. And I know you're going to say, I told you so.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so you actually make a willing choice to go against the grain. You take the risk to learn the lesson, potentially even hard way, even though you know that you're about to fall in your hat, you still do it.
Yeah, and this usually plays out for me in like friendships or relationships in my life, where it's like I'll hear, don't go to that thing tonight, it's not going to go well, and I'm like, well, I'm going to go anyhow, you're probably right, and then she's always right. But I also look at those things as like, we have to learn too, right? The point is not to never have an experience that's painful. We have to learn. So, but she's usually right. I usually shouldn't have done the thing that I did.
You have, when you say that your face lights up and becomes almost childlike, as a child that has done something and the parents said no, but you shouldn't have done it and you've done it anyway.
Yes. Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about specifically some of the very strong feminine energies in alignment with goddesses or other entities, because in my experience, they tend to empower us as women. And I'm going to talk specifically now about women. I'm not talking about, although obviously they can empower men, they can empower people who are non-binary, et cetera, et cetera. I'm talking specifically about women, maybe even trans women, or just anybody identifying as a woman. In my experience, and haven't really been working with any particular goddesses, but I always felt the strong energies because I identify this dark feminine very strongly. And it's a work that I've been doing on myself for the duration of my lifetime, really, to step into those energies. What I notice is when I step into that level of empowerment within myself as a woman, I notice that my relationships with women around me changes drastically. Oftentimes, and I'm going to be transparent, share why for me, is because I feel like I have outgrown those women. I feel like I'm now at a different level. And I'm not saying that cockily, like I'm better than them. No, it's just that I'm in a different level of development as a woman. And I see a sense of maybe potentially powerlessness within them that no longer in alignment with me, and that makes relationship difficult. So have you experienced, especially for you in relationship with Isis, who's so empowering, have you noticed that friction?
Oh, yes. 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 Most especially in my personal life. And I've been sitting with this and how to speak to this. But I think when you are empowered and you're embodying your path and you're interacting with other individuals who maybe because of fear or societal conditioning are not in that space themselves, they either have to meet you where you're at, or it becomes this like magnets, like that reverse, like it then becomes like you can't operate in the same space together anymore. This friction develops, this push energy. And so I found often in my personal life that the more in my power I've become, the more actually I think like comfortable in my own skin, where I don't need to pretend to be something that is being put forth as what I should be trying to be. With other women, the experience becomes competitive, sometimes nasty,
Yeah.
painful, really painful. I think some of my biggest wounds personally in my life have happened with other women, not with men, in
Same.
this type of interaction. Yeah. And so I think what it becomes for me is understanding that they're gonna that through being empowered, the lesson is not to be less empowered. The lesson or the understanding that I have is that I have to be empowered. I have to be truthful to this body and this story. And I no longer, or I would say I'm learning to not keep trying to make things work with other women who are not at that same place. Kind of like you were saying, like, it's like you grow through something, you've grown, you've shifted energetically, and now those frequencies don't resonate. And so we can't, it just doesn't work. So to try and force it actually makes things worse on my end. And I refuse, just from my own story, to dull myself so that someone else can feel comfortable.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting what you said about is there's this becomes this combative,
Yeah.
even cat fight comes to mind
Yep.
with women, which I experienced, but it's so much easier with men, which is interesting because I find when we step into our empowerment, the same friction happens with men too, because it's a different type, I feel, of outgrowing man.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it's a different level because
Yep.
to me it's like it's coming from an angle of not only my empowerment as a woman in a sexual sense, and I'm not talking about sexiness, looking sexy. I'm talking about
Yep.
owning my body, owning my
Yes.
sexual libidinal energy, right, and
Yeah.
commanding it and yielding it, and that can be really terrifying to a lot of men.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel it's easier to break away and move away from that. Why do you think that it's easier with men, but with women it's so difficult to break this attachment? And I want to be clear, it's not difficult for me to break this attachment. This is why
Yeah.
it's no longer working out, I'm moving away, but it's the other
They don't want to
person.
let you go. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like,
Oh, I know this. Yes, 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 yes. Oh, that's such a good question, Talia. I have experienced this so many times with women. In my personal life, I don't want to say, in the workspace is different. I think there's a desire when we're not empowered, there's a desire to have that experience. It's almost like what we were talking about earlier with deity and putting them on a pedestal. And I think sometimes with other women, it's like they don't want to lose that hope to be empowered themselves, or that feeling they have when they're with you. But they also don't want to show up and meet you in that place because it would mean stepping into change. And so I think that's why it gets really murky. And then I know for me personally, I get activated around being a good person and that I should be kind to them, and so my job there is like, that's not my responsibility, right? But
yeah.
I think it gets very convoluted and very messy with women, whereas with men, it's very, at least in my experience, has been very easy to be like, no, we're not going here anymore. Goodbye.
Yeah, and it's interesting because with men, I feel that it's as if they understand you just stepped on a different plate and they're not there, and it's perhaps even feels, I don't know, emasculating comes to mind, but I don't think it's really emasculation. I think it's just realization, because men tend to get the clear messages, right? It's this realization that like, okay, I get it, you just stepped into a different plate and I'm not there. But with women, yeah, the same thing. It's this attachment develops on the other end where it's challenging for them to recognize that the split has happened, that this has ended, and it can be very, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I think it's this like representation of maybe where growth isn't happening. It's just this interesting push and pull that ends up happening, and this entanglement with not wanting to let go. But if we can't meet in that place, then we're not really actually meeting.
Yeah.
But still there's this want to hold on to it. I think with men, like, it's very root chakra, boom. And with women, we can get into that sacral place very easily, where it gets all like, it can be really sexy, but it can also be like really just dark.
No, I think that a lot of probably cultural things go into it, and the way the women have been
Yes.
socialized in
Yeah.
terms of understanding relationship and things like that. And I think men in general are just more prone to moving away through things
Yeah.
in relationships, and we're taught to, no, you're supposed to stay, you're supposed to nurture, you're supposed to
Yes.
be receptive, you're
See,
supposed to be open. And
and
the
that goes
minute
back
you
to that good person.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think it's a shame because we need to recognize that we need to learn how to set and really setting boundary. So those boundaries with those people around us. And it's the minute you do it, you're like a bitch. It's like, oh no, I didn't know you're such a bitch. It's like I'm doing you and myself a favor here because
Right.
energy exchange, let's just save our energy exchange here.
Yeah. 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 And if there's in that friction of like when you're not in the same place, like it just doesn't work. And it's sad. It saddens me personally. And I think my hope is that we're all on a journey of opening up to allowing ourselves, that we don't have to be the same in order to get along. But I think that there is that desire. And like you were saying, that nurturing piece too of like, well, we should be growing together, but we're not really. But stories have endings. Stories have endings. And we have to allow that, I think, as women. It's safe to allow that.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about women, femininity, women, and sexuality. When I say sexuality, I don't mean sexy.
Yeah.
I mean
Yeah.
the libidinal energy of sexuality. And I want to talk about Jimmy Manton. I always say Jimmy Manson, not Manson, but Jimmy Manton. I know you're a fan of his work. He's done a number of depictions of goddesses. We know he done Isis Oracle, Kala Oracle. I think he done goddesses and sirens, right, for the Margaret Black.
Yep.
And there, a lot of people are not happy about the way he depicts the feminine. They say it's too sexualized. I actually like that because I feel like it's giving, because to me, his depictions don't feel sexy. They feel sexually empowered, which I think is the difference. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think that it's a good idea to give those energies their sexual power back?
Yeah. Well, I definitely am on the same page with you with his artwork. I actually find it to be very empowering and empowered. And I think, like, if it's okay to share a little bit personally here, I would say, like, my backstory for myself in regards to empowered sexuality. I grew up in a Christian cult. Women were considered fallen. Our bodies were considered leading men into temptation. And my father would measure my clothes. I had to wear nylons. I couldn't have my legs exposed. It was too tempting for the men. And there were men in charge of the congregation or church where I was who would come in and talk to me regularly about how my body was giving people impure thoughts.
Oh my God.
So when I
Handmaid's
left,
Tale.
what?
Handmaid's Tale.
Yes. So when I left that, a huge part for me of working with Isis and Kali and Inanna was saying, whoa, so they were trying to control that part of me. Like they saw the sexuality, and that became a means that they knew they could control me with shame. And so how do I reclaim this and say, I can be empowered, I can dress whatever way I want to, and I can hold this in my body, and I can be in this, and I can feel the spiritual experience of the empowered sexuality. And so for me, Jimmy's artwork is very much in resonance with a feminine being who is very comfortable in her sexuality, and that's allowed to be a part of her story. It's not her whole story, it's a part of her story. And so I think his artwork is, at least for me, and I understand some people don't have that experience, but for me, it's very much celebrating that this is a part of my sexuality. It's part of being embodied, and it's a part of my spirituality. So when you connect with me and we have this experience together, this is part of it, and it's actually sacred. It's not profane. If that makes sense to me.
It makes perfect sense. Was that because when you started talking about your past, which I knew a little bit about, but I didn't was to that extent.
Yeah.
And how long did that last?
So my parents joined the religion when I was around 5, and I left at 19, and then I left again at 21, and they're still in the religion.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
So the minute you started talking, what came to mind is, oh my God, how did she get through all that interjected shame and guilt?
Yeah.
and you touched on that, but did that take a long time? Because my
Oh,
understanding,
yes.
yeah, it's
Oh, yeah. And I'm still, and I will, and that's why I say, you know, walking with Ices all of my life, because I will be peeling back those layers for my whole life, because that indoctrination and that level of shaming around being a woman was happened in my very, very formative years. So that's going to be, you know, that's a lifelong story for me. But the beauty of it is, oh my God, the contrast, once I started to shift that and to feel like, wow, this is actually like something that's beautiful and it's spiritual. It's not bad. It's not an evil thing that I'm doing to other people when they connect with me. So I think it's definitely, it will be a lifelong story. But I'm also grateful to understand the depth and the breadth of that lesson.
my God.
Yeah.
Was it a Christian cult?
Yeah. So I was raised in a very strict strain of Jehovah's Witness.
I have no idea what that is. I'm assuming
Yeah,
it's something to do with Christianity. So I'm thinking
it's a
about,
mess.
a complete dogmatic, indoctrinated prison of your feminine that you've been
Yep.
in for all this time. And I feel that we globally experiencing the indoctrination feminine on a like more generalized scale coming from Christianity.
Mhm.
But you experienced it in such a direct. So I'm trying to say that you were literally in a prison.
Yeah.
I feel I myself am in a bigger cage where I have more
Mhm.
room because you experience it so direct and for such a long period of time. Does that help you to spot, especially when you work with women, when you do readings for women, does it help you to spot that imprisonment that they still keep of their feminine?
Yes, it does. And it also allows me to have compassion for that. And I think that's where, like, if we just to circle back really quick to that discussion we had about that piece with other women, it's also an understanding of if you are imprisoned and it's out here, like where it was for me, it was very clear, right? Like there was a point where I'm like, whoa, this is not like people are telling me something that's not true. When it's out here and you've kind of been gently dipped into it, you don't always see how it's affecting you, right? But because I had it here with other, especially with other women or people who identify as women, I can feel the frequency of that shame, of that level of shame. And it's so subtle, you know, and I think that is, like you said, what we're uncovering now for ourselves is that subtlety of that level of shame and how it really holds you down. Yeah.
Yes, because for me, there was a long time in my life where I had other women tell me about women experiencing oppression or being second sex to men or other things that I personally never felt because I'm a very strong personality. And I think that strong personality helped me to pass through that and not experience it or not perceive that as for it is until I finally actually experienced it. And then I went, oh, how could I not see it? It's so prevalent, right?
Yeah.
And with your experience,
Mm.
how did you not end up, and maybe you did, how did you not end up completely annihilating and hating the masculine? You're
Yeah.
like, I kind of did. I don't know. Did you? It's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah. No, I think there have definitely been times where it's been difficult for me to understand what led to that level of subjugation. But I will say Satan, because Satan is the first deity that was ever where I was like, oh, I'm talking to a god right now, right? And I would actually say that he was very helpful for me in uncovering the root of why the subjugation that men have experienced as well. It's a different story. It's a very different flavor, but it's there. And I think he helped me to see a doorway, a window into why this is a course of action for the masculine. But it is something that I still balance. I would say trust with men takes a long time for me.
yeah, I read a lot of books on the trapped feminine, and it just like it was hard not to be angry at my husband, who is in no
Yeah.
way has the
Yeah.
toxic masculine even at all. but I had to have to find an outsider that was in proximity to me to project my anger on. And he ended up, I had to tell him, like, I'm reading this book, get out of my sight. It's not about you, but you just so happen to be target of a household, and you're here with me. So, but it's hard. I agree, and I struggle with it too, to incorporate that. And it wasn't until recently that I'm starting to realize how much Satan, Lucifer slash, I don't know if there's, sometimes I think they're interchangeable, how they really have been liberators of the feminine. I mean, if you think
Yeah.
about the witch gatherings, right? It's ultimate liberation of the feminine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I would say to you, for me, the liberation that he opened a door for was, why are these people saying this is true? For me, there was the question why. And there was such power to that I had the ability to be able to question why. And that was coming through for me at 10, 11, 12. He would, like, because how I grew up, hours and hours sitting listening to sermons. And he would be there saying, oh, but why? Why are they saying this? Why is there only one truth? And that was very liberating for me. And I think the essence of a left-hand path, a pagan path, is saying this and that are true, and why. And that we're allowed to grow. It's allowed to change. It's allowed to shift. And I think Satan, Lucifer, whatever you want to call that entity, has really held a space where it's safe to question. And you're not crazy for questioning. You don't have to, just because you question doesn't mean you're crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it still breaks my heart that it's such a dangerous territory to go there for women, to work with those energies. I know for me, especially as a psychologist, it's like I'm thinking I'm a second away from somebody seeing my tarot channel and suddenly demonizing the whole thing, right?
Right.
So
Right.
it's amazing, because the witch hunt, I feel like, continues for women endlessly.
Oh, 100%. Oh, and I agree with you wholeheartedly on that, Natalia. I think it's also like a really easy cop out for people to say, oh, well, you do that. I don't need to listen to anything that you say because you are crazy. Like, again, I go back to this. I come across that a lot. If you're going to be free with that part of yourself, with that, I will say witch self, that you want to embrace and explore that, it's very easy for people to make judgments about that and say, I don't have to listen to anything that you say now because this isn't real.
I would go further and say that it's not so much that we're dabbling into this that seen to a lot of people misunderstood as demonic or a bad or a cult or evil. I think it's more that seeing a woman who's empowered by herself is scary to this day. And I think, right?
And we go back to what we were saying earlier too, like it's a threat. You are a threat because, and that's why I'm saying, I think with women there ends that feeling. It's like, it's a threat of, wow, if you do things differently, you are different. And that would mean that in order for anyone who's feeling triggered around that they would have to change, that in order for them to live that truth for themselves, they would have to change.
Yes. And they don't want to rock their status quo because it's built around the nuances of some form of subjugation and empowerment. And, and I don't say that as to put any of these women down. And I'm still in that side. I think it's inevitably for all of us. I think it's impossible to be fully empowered because as women, we're taking on so much shit. It's to detox it. I think it's like, if I die halfway detox, I think I'll be very happy. But who knows? So when you do readings specifically for female clients, and when you see they're still imprisoned, do you feel it's your responsibility to tell them? Do you feel it's your responsibility to broach that subject, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, I love this question. So I do feel that it is not appropriate to share a shadow piece or a wound that someone is not ready to uncover within themselves. So I do not, if we're in session together, or if I'm reading for you, and again, that's why I've got Ices there, because I check in, I feel for the energy. Like, I can see that there's a grid of disempowerment here that someone's tapped into, but is it time for them to explore that? And if it's not, then my responsibility is not to unplug them from the matrix before they're ready. Like, you can't, that's actually more I think, damaging than having the patience to wait for them to get there.
Mm.
Like, I think that there's a piece where you can encourage and you should share, but there's also a level where to bash somebody over the head with something when they are not ready is actually more damaging than allowing them to open to it themselves. So, like, if someone had come to me when I was unplugging from my parents' religion and said, you know, this is insanity, and I wasn't ready to hear that, I would have gone into a defensive mode for my family experience, right? So, like, it actually wouldn't have helped me to wake up. So I look at with my clients of, I am holding a sacred space, and I always check in with, is it appropriate for me to share this? And if it's not, then there's a gentle way that I might be able to encourage them to read a specific book or to work with a specific deity. But I don't necessarily have to bash them over the head with something they're not ready to open up to within themselves. You know, especially when we're dealing with like abuse in childhood or something that's, you know, something that's really, that causes a lot of shame to come up for them. Sometimes we need to allow that to be an unfurling at the client's pace, not what I can see because I'm outside of it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I totally agree. Especially with psychologists, it's kind of the same scenario. Patient comes in and you're seeing something, you're not going to bash them on the head with it if they're not ready to digest it, because the resistance is going to come up. They're going to be resistant to hearing it. And then they're going to get defensive. And do you think that this, your energy of being, for me at least, your energy comes across as empowered in your own sense of self, assertive, and comfortable in your power. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people who gravitate toward you are perceiving on some level, whether they're conscious of it or subconscious, that energy, especially people who ask you for the reading. Do you think do you find, in terms of patterns of clients, that there's particular individuals who gravitating toward you, who may be ready to listen to the powerful type of messaging?
Yes, absolutely. I would say overwhelmingly women, or people who are opening up to their femininity within themselves, and who have usually dealt with some form of indoctrination or abuse. Tend to be the women or the clients that are drawn to work with me. And I do find that a lot of people who have dealt with religious abuse through Christianity are very much drawn to connect with the work that I do, and especially the channel content. And I feel very blessed to be able to hold that space. And I really feel like I've lived, the life that I've lived has allowed me to hold that space. Yeah. But yes, there's definitely a frequency of someone trying to open up to their own power. And oftentimes it does involve leaving something behind that they value or that they think they value. Yeah.
Now, switching a little bit gears here, switching a little bit to tarot. You've been doing tarot for a very long time. What do you think has been the most surprising aspect in your relationship to tarot over the years that just like really surprised you?
Yeah, I think how fluid it's been, because when I started, I was really like rigid with, I didn't want to be the fortune teller on the side of the road. I really wanted to come from like a self-growth and empowerment space. And over the years, I've realized that like those kind of mundane, excuse me, I should say tarot has helped me to realize that those mundane, the minor arcana aspect of life is just as valid as the majors. And so I would say tarot has really helped me open up to fluidity in the human experience. And it's also really helped me to realize that it's storytelling. Anytime I'm sitting and reading tarot, I'm telling my client's story back to them. And that is like the fucking coolest thing ever. Like that is like, and I didn't know when I started that that's what I was doing, but that is the thing that's allowing tarot to be a lifelong journey for me, is that there's no end to that. It's infinite, but it's very fluid.
Can you see yourself doing anything else? Because you obviously lit up when you talk about you recognize.
Yeah, not really, no.
And I was going to ask you, can you live without tarot? And I realized this one cannot live without tarot. And if there's no tarot deck, she's going to make her own tarot deck. So you can't imagine anything else becoming a chef, becoming, I don't know, a therapist, becoming an artist, a musician?
I think if there was anything else, there's a fair amount of therapy to what I do. Um, I think if I was going to do anything else, would be to write. I do love to write. So I think if there was going to be something else, but it would still somehow be attached to this. I mean, I've been doing this my whole life. Even when I was little in the church I was at, women would come and sit with me and cry and talk about things that at 12, I didn't understand what they were going through. But I've always had this experience with people of like holding a space and listening, and that there was something that we were doing energetically, no matter what the words were. So I think that will always be a part of whatever I'm doing, if that makes sense. But tarot is like the coolest. I don't know. I just love it. It's so much fun. It's so much fun. It's such a fun way to hold that space.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I always say if I couldn't do psychology, I would be like a tarot reader and tarot, get more into that career path of tarot for sure. Because I agree, there's something really exciting working with images.
Yes.
It also reminded me of how much you have evolved and changed on your channel. And I don't know do you notice the shift? Because I think it's so. I think we'll change when we have content. I mean, I at least on my other channel, I see the difference, how more organically I talk about the subject matter. But with you, what I personally notice is the shift in the sound of your voice,
Mm-hmm.
the way you hold your body, and the way you visually show up. It's
Yeah.
to me, it's a different woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you notice
It,
that.
yeah, I have noticed that. I mean, I don't go back and look, but every once in a while, a client or a student will be like, "Oh, I'm looking at this video," and then I'll look at it and be like, "Wow, that's me." But one of my first shamanic teachers said to me, "You are a shapeshifter, and you need to give yourself permission to change many times in this life."
Ooh,
So that was very powerful for me. Of not people can get really comfortable with that, like you should only have that's your message, that you need to stay in that box. And I'm very thankful that I don't do that to myself.
yeah, it'll be very interesting to watch if you continue to have the channel, to watch what's going to, because I have seen the shape shifting. Even I recently went over your content, because there were videos a year ago I found that I haven't seen, and I noticed even a year ago it's a different
Yeah.
woman. So
Yeah. And that's a part of walking with deity and with tarot is you have to do your work, right? Like I can't hold a space and read for a client and not be doing my work on my end. And so all of that does lead to evolution, and it does lead to growth. It does lead to change, and that can be threatening for people, but I hope it's also an encouragement to allow themselves to grow too when they see that. Like, you don't have to stay as one aspect of self. You can explore myriad areas of yourself. Yeah.
with your son, do you mind saying how old your son is?
He's 10.
He's 10. So with your son, do you spot the deities or gods or energies that are circling around him? And if you do, it looks like you do. I'm looking at your
Yeah.
face, and I know you do. And what do you do about it? Do you share that with him? Is it too early? How do you approach it? Or
Yeah. So I think I approached parenting him around this as since I remember, have talked to other entities. And so my approach was, I'm not going to tell him what I see. I'm going to let him have his own experience. But if he comes to me, we will dialogue. And I would say from about 3 forward, he's been talking to things. And he comes to me and says, "Mom, I've got this energy. They said this, or I feel this, I feel that." And so we've dialogued about it over his entire life. And it's really cool to see who comes forward and how he experiences them. I don't give him names. I let him assign his own names to them. But it's very much a part of our lives. And because I do have a shamanic background, we call God the grandmothers. So he will always say, "Thank you, grandmothers. Thank you, grandmothers." And so that is something that I have passed on to him of, opening up to duality in Godhead, in spirit, and that it can be a comforting experience for him and something that's on his side, not something that's watching him to punish him.
Has
Yeah.
having a son and not a daughter helped you heal your relationship to the masculine?
Number one thing. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Without him, I would not see. Without him, I would not have seen as clearly how we indoctrinate boys just
Mhm.
as much as we do girls. It's just a different way. Um, and how to see how emotional he is, um, and that there are forces that would like to cut that out of him has been very important for me to see that, oh, for individuals that are male in my life, they've been cut off from this part of themselves. Here's this little being that I can help him not be cut off from it. But for so many other men out there, they've been totally cut off from this part of themselves. They were told that they don't get to explore that.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes you, I was thinking how it's probably helps you to see the little boy inside of every single man.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Which again allows for a lot more compassion, Natalia, which then I go back to Isis. That's been one of her big lessons for me is compassion.
do you struggle with that compassion? And do you separate compassion versus humility?
Ooh. Do I struggle with that? No. I think because I've had so many instances to see it. And I do feel I do consider that I have psychic ability. And so I do feel with that I can often penetrate, if I'm allowed to and it's appropriate, penetrate someone's energy and feel just how scared and how much pain they're in, which has always helped me to develop compassion. Um, Compassion versus humility. Well, that's kind of tricky, right? And I think we go back to that feminine thing of where I can get tripped up around that is if I'm a good person, then I'll let someone walk all over my boundaries because I can understand what they've been through. So I think a lot of my story has been I can understand and have compassion, but that doesn't mean that that person then gets to destroy a part of me. So where is that balance? So I think that's the dance I do. And humility. Ooh, I guess compassion does teach us humility, right? That's part of that understanding. So I think it's this dance with that compassion, humility, but also boundaries.
I
Yeah.
agree. I think compassion comes first, and it forces us to fall on our knees and to be humble, right? And
Yes.
to get into the smallness of ourselves. Um, where where do you think the feminine is heading? It's a big question, I know, but
Oh, oh,
what do you perceive?
my I would say my hope is that the feminine is heading into a space where we can be fully embodied and an equal part of the community and conversation. I think we need to get through the teenage years of figuring that piece out. Like I feel like we've made some growth, but I think we're still dealing with a pretty serious grid of disempowerment that we as women, we who are here as women now, I do think we have a responsibility to release that shame level because as long as we're operating from that shame place, we aren't fully able to be empowered. And my hope is for women, for the sacred feminine, that we're moving into a space where we don't have to cut a part of ourselves off to be an equal voice at the table. But like there's room for everyone at the table, if that makes sense. That we can work together, but we can all be heard. We
Yeah.
all have value.
Yeah, I think there has been a big separation between divine feminine, divine masculine energies as relating to men and women, where receptive nurturing means you're woman, active, driven equals your man, but
Yeah.
the really balanced scale of a person. And I think that once we see them at a hand lens, it creates all this friction, all this stuff.
Yeah.
This terror YouTube sphere,
Mhm.
do you think we need? Do you feel there's enough feminine in the terror YouTube sphere? Do you feel that it's pretty? Because to me, it feels very masculine and not a, I would even go as far as to say borderline toxic masculine
Mm,
in energy.
I can see that. I do wish we had more feminine voices. But I think if I'm really honest, I wish that across the board. I wish that we had more, and that in order to be heard, we didn't have to be in our masculine energy. Like, I wish we didn't have to do this in order to come across. So I do think, and I do wish and hope that we're moving into a space with more of that feminine energy. Um, and again, to go back to Isis with more embodiment. And I do think the tarot helps us to start to open up to that, to see windows into how we can step into that ourselves. And I think what I've really noticed with my channel over the last few years is that people are really thirsty for that. They're looking for that.
Yeah, I see that. I see that thirst too. I think I recognize the thirst in myself, and when I recognize things in myself, I often know as a psychologist, if I feel something, I know collectively a lot of other people feel that too. And this is why I also like having more queer creators, because this energies of feminine and masculine are seen through a more kind of fluid lens versus either one or. But yeah, I definitely want to see more of that on YouTube, and just in general, I really want to see much more of it.
Yeah. And I mean, I love collecting decks and I love sharing decks online. And that's a way that a lot of people will find content, is through that. But the real beauty of a practice with tarot is about so much more than, and I kind of consider that to be like I'm going to go really polarizing here, but like a really masculine energy of like, this is mine and I'm collecting. And
Exactly.
This is what
Yeah.
more
Grabbing
consumerist
onto
kind of
things.
space. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my hope is that we can have all those decks. That's great. But like, what are we doing with the decks? Like, let's look at that piece. To me, that's, I love seeing content like that, and balancing that beautiful lineage of divination and witchcraft that comes along with tarot and the occult, which is so juicy. And I love that. But also with that growth, evolution for the self and the soul. That's like my ultimate sweet spot that I hope for all of us.
I know, me too, because I see that so empowering, because it mirrors back, it's almost mirrors back permission for all of us. This is how I'm doing it. This is how I'm stepping into myself. And because I can do this, you can do this too. And you have this tool to do this. So yeah, oh God, I wish I could see more of that, but thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed this, and I'm sure that everybody else will too, because a lot of people don't know a lot about you. So this is like extrapolating a little bit from within you, and it has been really beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Natalia.